So in the previous Aliyah, there is this dramatic moment when the angel calls out Abraham's name and calls out Abraham's name twice, calls out Avraham, Avraham. And between those two iterations of Abraham's name, there is a mark in the traditional text, not in the written text, rather, not in the Torah scroll, called a psik, which suggests that the first mention of Abraham's name is different from the second mention of Abraham's name. And there's a mystical interpretation of this that suggests that it's referring to two different Avrahams. Abraham before the Akedah of Isaac, the binding of Isaac, and Abraham after Akedat Yitzchak, Abraham after the binding of Isaac. And the difference between these two is that before the binding of Isaac, Abraham is not yet fully formed, and yet after the binding of Isaac, he's complete. Now, there is something in the text to suggest that might be a bit of what the Torah is going after. After all, we're about to read a series of blessings that are to come upon Abraham after this trial, and then we read about his extended family who's flourishing, and that bodes well for the next generation, for Isaac to find a wife and to continue the generations on in the covenant. But of course, we look at this and we think, how can he be more whole? He is completely broken. We're going to see Avraham descending the mountain, not with Isaac, but alone. And we don't know where Isaac goes. And when the Parsha ends, when the Torah portion ends, we're going to see that Avraham is living alone in Be'er Shava, as it says in the Torah scroll, but not with Isaac. So is it that this interpretation is simply wrong, that he's not more complete? Or could it be that there's a kind of completeness and wholeness that doesn't have to mean perfection, that could admit some brokenness or unfinished work as well? So we'll read now the fourth and fifth aliyot. These are on page 105 in the Lev Shalem Machzor. ויקרא מלאך אדוני אל אברהם שנית מן השמיים ויאמר בנשבעתי נאום אדוני כי יען אשר עשית את הדבר הזה ולא חסכת את בנך את יחידך כי ברך אברכך והרבה הרבה את זרעך ככוכבי השמיים וככל אשר על שפת הים וירש זרעך את שאר אויביו ויתברכו בזרעך כל גויי הארץ עקב אשר שמעת בקולי וישב אברהם אל נעריו ויקומו וילכו יחדיו אל באר שבע וישב אברהם בבאר שבע. Now we continue with the fifth and final aliyah of this Torah reading that records the names of the children of Abraham's brother Nahor, and Rivka is mentioned here, and we know that later in the Torah Isaac will marry Rebekah, and so we have right here embedded, right after the Akedah, this promise that the generations will continue in a covenant with God. And this is the fifth aliyah, and it's on page 105. ויהי אחרי הדברים האלה ויוגד אברהם לאמור הנה ילדה מילכה גם היא בנים לנחור אחיך את בוץ בכורו ואת בוז אחיו ואת כמואל אבי ארם ואת כסד ואת חזו ואת פלדש ואת יתלף ואת בתואל ובתואל ילד את רבקה 8 ילדה מילכה לנחור אחי אברהם ופילגשו ושמה ראומה ותלד גם היא את טבח ואת גחם ואת תחש ואת מעכה